Simulacra and Simulation by Baudrillard. Chapter 4. The China Syndrome. The fundamental stake is at the level of television and information. Just as the extermination of the Jews disappeared behind the televised event Holocaust, the cold medium of television having been simply substituted for the cold system of extermination one believed to be exorcising through it, so the China Syndrome is a great example of the supremacy of the televised event over the nuclear event which, itself, remains improbable and in some sense imaginary. Besides, the film shows this to be the case, without wanting to, that TV is present precisely where it happens is not coincidental. It is the intrusion of TV into the reactor that seems to give rise to the nuclear incident, because TV is like its anticipation and its model in the everyday universe, television of the real and of the real world, because TV and information in general are a form of catastrophe in the formal and topological sense René Thorn gives the word, a radical qualitative change of a whole system. Or, rather, TV and the nuclear are of the same nature. Behind the hot and negentropic concepts of energy and information, they have the same power of deterrence as cold systems do. TV itself is also a nuclear process of chain reaction, but implosive. It cools and neutralizes the meaning and the energy of events. Thus the nuclear, behind the presumed risk of explosion, that is to say of hot catastrophe, conceals a long, cold catastrophe, the universalization of a system of deterrence. At the end of the film again comes the second massive intrusion of the press and of TV that instigates the drama, the murder of the technical director by the special forces, a drama that substitutes for the nuclear catastrophe that will not occur. The homology of the nuclear and of television can be read directly in the images. Nothing resembles the control and telecommand headquarters of the nuclear power station more than TV studios, and the nuclear consoles are combined with those of the recording and broadcasting studios in the same imaginary. Thus everything takes place between these two poles, of the other center, that of the reactor, in principle the veritable heart of the matter. We will know nothing. It, like the real, has vanished and become illegible, and is at bottom unimportant in the film. When one attempts to suggest it to us, in its imminent catastrophe, it does not work on the imaginary plane. The drama unfolds on the screens and nowhere else. Harrisburg, One Watergate, and Network, such is the trilogy of the China Syndrome, an indissoluble trilogy in which one no longer knows which is the effect and which is the symptom. The ideological argument, Watergate effect, isn't it nothing but the symptom of the nuclear, Harrisburg effect, or of the computer science model, network effect? The real, Harrisburg, isn't it nothing but the symptom of the imaginary, network and China Syndrome, or the opposite? Marvelous indifferentiation, ideal constellation of simulation. Marvelous title, then, this China Syndrome, because the reversibility of symptoms and their convergence in the same process constitute precisely what we call a syndrome. That it is Chinese adds the poetic and intellectual quality of a conundrum or supplication. Obsessive conjunction of the China Syndrome and Harrisburg. But is all that so involuntary? Without positing magical links between the simulacrum and the real, it is clear that the syndrome is not a stranger to the real accident in Harrisburg, not according to a causal logic, but according to the relations of contagion and silent analogy that link the real to models and to simulacra. To television's induction of the nuclear into the film corresponds, with a troubling obviousness, the film's induction of the nuclear incident in Harrisburg. Strange procession of a film over the real, the most surprising that was given us to witness. The real corresponded point by point to the simulacrum, including the suspended, incomplete character of the catastrophe, which is essential from the point of view of deterrence. The real arranged itself, in the image of the film, to produce a simulation of catastrophe. From there to reverse our logic and to see in the China Syndrome the veritable event and in Harrisburg its simulacrum, there is only one step that must be cheerfully taken. Because it is via the same logic that, in the film, nuclear reality arises from the television effect, and that in reality Harrisburg arises from the China Syndrome cinema effect. But the China Syndrome is also not the original prototype of Harrisburg. One is not the simulacrum of which the other would be the real. There are only simulacra, and Harrisburg is a sort of second-order simulation. There is certainly a chain reaction somewhere, and we will perhaps die of it, but this chain reaction is never that of the nuclear, it is that of simulacra and of the simulation where all the energy of the real is effectively swallowed, no longer in a spectacular nuclear explosion, but in a secret and continuous implosion, and that today perhaps takes a more deathly turn than that of all the explosions that rock us. Because an explosion is always a promise, it is our hope. Note how much, in the film as in Harrisburg, the whole world waits for something to blow up, for destruction to announce itself and remove us from this unnameable panic, from this panic of deterrence that it exercises in the invisible form of the nuclear. That the heart of the reactor at last reveals its hot power of destruction, that it reassures us about the presence of energy, albeit catastrophic, and bestows its spectacle on us. Because unhappiness is when there is no nuclear spectacle, no spectacle of nuclear energy in itself. Hiroshima is over, and it is for that reason that it is rejected. It would be perfectly accepted if it lent itself to spectacle as previous forms of energy did. Parousia of catastrophe, substantial food for our messianic libido. But that is precisely what will never happen. What will happen will never again be the explosion, but the implosion. No more energy in its spectacular and pathetic form, all the romanticism of the explosion, which had so much charm, being at the same time that of revolution, but the cold energy of the simulacrum and of its distillation in homeopathic doses in the cold systems of information. What else do the media dream of besides creating the event simply by their presence? Everyone decries it, but everyone is secretly fascinated by this eventuality. Such is the logic of simulacra. It is no longer that of divine predestination, it is that of the procession of models, but it is just as inexorable. And it is because of this that events no longer have meaning. It is not that they are insignificant in themselves, it is that they were preceded by the model, with which their processes only coincided. Thus it would have been marvelous to repeat the script for the China syndrome at Fessenheim, during the visit offered to the journalists by the EDF, French Electric Company, to repeat on this occasion the accident linked to the magic eye, to the provocative presence of the media. Alas, nothing happened. And on the other hand, yes. So powerful is the logic of simulacra, a week after, the unions discovered fissures in the reactors. Miracle of contagions, miracle of analogic chain reactions. Thus, the essence of the film is not in any respect the Watergate effect in the person of Jane Fonda, not in any respect TV as a means of exposing nuclear vices, but on the contrary TV as the twin orbit and twin chain reaction of the nuclear one. Besides, just at the end, and there the film is unrelenting in regard to its own argument, when Jane Fonda makes the truth explode directly, maximum Watergate effect, her image is juxtaposed with what will inexorably follow it and efface it on the screen, a commercial of some kind. The network effect goes far beyond the Watergate effect and spreads mysteriously into the Harrisburg effect, that is to say not into the nuclear threat, but into the simulation of nuclear catastrophe. So, it is simulation that is effective, never the real. The simulation of nuclear catastrophe is the strategic result of this generic and universal undertaking of deterrence, accustoming the people to the ideology and the discipline of absolute security, to the metaphysics of fission and fissure. To this end the fissure must be a fiction. A real catastrophe would delay things, it would constitute a retrograde incident, of the explosive kind, without changing the course of things. Did Hiroshima perceptibly deter, the universal process of deterrence? In the film, also, real fusion would be a bad argument. The film would regress to the level of a disaster movie, weak by definition, because it means returning things to their pure event. The China syndrome, itself, finds its strength in filtering catastrophe, in the distillation of the nuclear spectre through the omnipresent Hertzian relays of information. It teaches us, once again without meaning to, that nuclear catastrophe does not occur, is not meant to happen, in the real either, any more than the atomic clash was at the dawning of the Cold War. The equilibrium of terror rests on the eternal deferral of the atomic clash. The atom and the nuclear are made to be disseminated for deterrent ends. The power of catastrophe must, instead of stupidly exploding, be disseminated in homeopathic, molecular doses, in the continuous reservoirs of information. Therein lies the true contamination, never biological and radioactive, but, rather, a mental destructuration through a mental strategy of catastrophe. If one looks carefully, the film introduces us to this mental strategy, and in going further, it even delivers a lesson diametrically opposed to that of Watergate. If every strategy today is that of mental terror and of deterrence tied to the suspension and the eternal simulation of catastrophe, then the only means of mitigating this scenario would be to make the catastrophe arrive, to produce or to reproduce a real catastrophe. To which nature is at times given, in its inspired moments. It is God who through his cataclysms unknots the equilibrium of terror in which humans are imprisoned. Closer to us, this is what terrorism is occupied with as well, making real, palpable violence surface in opposition to the invisible violence of security. Besides, therein lies terrorism's ambiguity. Footnotes. Footnote 1. The incident at the nuclear reactor on 3 Mile Island, which will shortly follow the release of the film. End of chapter.